Hello and welcome to the Brass Band Podcast Archive Edition. I'm Sarah Baumann.
And I'm Kenny Crookston. And together we're here to uncover the amazing and unusual stories that define the brass band world. From its origins and traditions to the modern innovations and fantastic music that have shaped this remarkable culture.
In each episode, we'll dive into Brass Bands England's exciting brass band archive, housed at Heritage Quay at the University of Huddersfield.
So, whether you're a seasoned brass band lover,
just getting started,
or just curious, you're in the right place.
Let's go! Hello and welcome back to the Brass Band Podcast Archive Edition. This week, we're talking all about brass bands in Remembrance, and we're here at Brass Bands England HQ in not so sunny Barnsley today, but we are here in the office together. Hi Kenny, how are you doing?
I'm good, Sarah, how are you?
Yes, good. You have had a sunny day this week and had a very lovely day in London. Tell us about your week.
We did actually have a really wonderful day yesterday. We were invited to the Royal Garden Party at Buckingham Palace. Our chairman at BBE, Mike Kilroy, and our two wives, Emma and Annie, were with us at a really lovely occasion in Buckingham Palace Gardens. It was quite an experience. It was a Creative Industries Day. They were celebrating the creative industries, so every time you looked around there was another face that you recognised and said, I know who that is, but I can't remember their name. So one or two I did get them as well. But the King had the great honour of meeting Mike and getting to shake his hand as well. I was just standing just too far away, so Mike was in pole position. But it was a lovely encounter just to see the two of them.
Amazing. Well, great to have brass banding recognised alongside all of the other creative industries and to get that royal recognition, which is something we'll talk about a little bit later on. Not the first time that brass banding has had royal recognition for what we do. So this week we're talking about Remembrance, which for lots and lots of people, brass bands are such an integral part of what Remembrance is and what Remembrance does. In particular, the last post and that involvement in Remembrance services and Remembrance parades. Have you played the last post?
The last time I played the last post, I actually recorded it for my wife's school, and it was played on the tannoy, I believe, on that day.
It's no pressure.
It's a lot easier doing it in a virtual recording studio than it is doing it live, and I've always got a great respect for the players who do it regularly. Apart from anything else, it's always cold. And you're always standing around for ages before you do it. So just being able to pick it up and go straight into that. But it's not an easy thing to do. And of course, the eyes and ears of your entire community are on you while you're doing it. So I've always got great respect for players who take that on.
Is that something that you've always done with bands, being involved in that Remembrance weekend? Is that always a busy weekend?
I think it varies really for bands. I think it is one of these core duties of a band in many, many communities across the country. That's one of the things that they just always do. And it's something that the general public will see. That's the role of the band, to be involved in the Remembrance Parade, the last post, the thing that they'll do at the Cenotaph in their village. And every village band in the country virtually will have done one at some time or another. I'm aware of bands that are given the premises free charge all year on the basis that they will play at the Remembrance service, close links with bodies like the Royal British Legion. And certainly, every band I've been involved in has done them for over many years. We used to do one with Whitburn when I was there. It was like closer to the one that you see in the Albert Hall every time with all the local branches of the British Legion would come in with their flags and Falkirk Town Hall back in the day. And there would be entertainment in the first half as well. And we were always involved in that. And it was a really prestigious thing to be involved in while it went on. But I think the event itself stopped running and the venue itself is gone now as well. So, but yeah, it's an important part of a lot of bands' annual calendar, really.
Yeah, and a lot of our members that I speak to, they consider it such an important part of their civic duty and contribution to their community. And often when we have conversations around charitable status, we come back to that conversation a lot. They feel that's so important, that that's part of what they do is giving back to the community. So it's still very, very ingrained, I would say, in the current culture of what we do. So this week we've got a couple of special guests who we're going to hear from a little bit later. Once again, we're going to hear some great clips of music provided by Wobplay and talk through some of the pieces that we have in the Brass Bands archive. One of the first really significant archive items, and one of the reasons that we really wanted to focus on this topic, is that there's an amazing memorial volume of the British bandsmen, listing all of the bandsmen who died in World War II. And that's a volume from 1954. And I think that's so significant that that was published in the first place, that there was such a roll of honour to, justify that. And I think it's fair to say that those journals have drawn most interest from the archive at the moment, which is amazing. And Kenny, which I think we did mention in the last episode, used to be the editor of the Bandsman.
For a lifetime ago now.
Yeah, I know, a long, long time ago. Is that the kind of thing that you considered your role as editor to promote?
Absolutely. I do remember it would have been in 2014, which was obviously the centenary of the beginning of the Great War, as it was known at the time. We'd done quite a significant edition about that. And that was actually probably the most requested extra editions that I ever had, was that one. We had an awful lot of people who obviously had that family names had been mentioned or whatever it was, but that was one that we really got an awful lot of people wanting to buy that single edition. And I think that's a measure of how important these things are. The Bandsman itself, during the period of the Great War, it would actually run an updated in memoriam. Every edition was, sad news from the front of France, bandsmen so-and-so had been killed in action, and it was just a constant right through the whole 4 or 5 years of the war. I mean, incredibly touching, really, when you go back and look at these things. When I had the archive in my office, it was just one of these things when you did have a spare hour, sometimes you just pick up an edition, have a look through, and you see these things, and these are people's lives that have been marked in that way in the Bandsman, which was there for everybody to see. Of course, there was many, many thousands of people read the Bandsman in those days. It was the only outlet for the vast majority of brass band people. So it was a really touching time going through all that stuff at that time. We used to run a 50 years, 100 years ago sort of thing as well, fairly regularly. And obviously there would be nobody alive reading it that would remember it at the time, but I'm sure there was many, many family names that were brought up during that time. Yeah,
and presumably there were people published in that who were performing servicemen, bandsmen in that sense, but also community bandsmen. And I think it's really interesting how we use that phrase so much, a bandsman. It is like a badge of honour, whether that's part of your professional life or just what you do. People consider that that's so much that identity.
Yeah, but forget as well, of course, going back to that period, entire bands would sign up to go away and fight together. They'd become a division, a regiment in themselves. In fact, the band that I kind of grew up in from 10 to 18 at Broxburn Band in central Scotland. It's now Broxburn and Livingston Band, but that's exactly what they did. The entire band went and signed up and went to the front. At the time, they were one of the top bands in Scotland. They'd just won the Scottish Championships a few times, which was quite a new event in these days. But they were one of the top 2 or 3 bands in Scotland. And they weren't, again, for very many years. It was 50 or 60 years before they got back to being close to that status. So I was a very young cornet player when I joined the band. There was a guy who used to sit next to me in third cornet. Johnny Bogue was his name, and he was a lovely old man, and he'd been in the band forever. I can remember playing at the Scottish Championships, and it would have been 1975. We played really well, actually. We gave a good performance and came third. But I can remember Johnny standing crying on stage because it was almost like this was the band back to the status that he had always craved. It was his town band. His family had been in the band for generations. But this was them back to that status again. And here we were. It's something that was fitting, if you like, of that great band. Now, 6 of the members of the band were actually killed in action. In fact, 3 of them shared the same surname, and I'm pretty sure they were for the same family, the Websters. But what an incredible commitment, not just to the war effort, but to say we're going to sign up as a band and go and do it. And I'm sure this is replicated all over the country. That's something that would have happened everywhere.
Absolutely. So on that note, I think it's about time we should listen to some music. So let's hear Reg Vardy's version of The Last Post. Welcome back. That was a very short excerpt of The Last Post, performed by the Reg Vardy Band at Brass in Concert 2016. If you want to hear the full performances of any of the tracks that we play in any of our episodes, you can do that by heading to wobplay.com, that's wobplay.com, where you'll be able to listen in full. Next up, we're going to speak to one of our special guests, and this is Elizabeth Smith, who is the Public Engagement Officer at the Commonwealth War Graves Commission, and she also happens to be our safeguarding officer here at Brass Bands England. So today I'm joined by Elizabeth Smith. Elizabeth, you've got a couple of different hats on, or different branded T-shirts that you wear. So why don't you tell us a little bit about who you are and what you do?
Yeah, it was a bit strange coming in today wearing my Commonwealth War Graves Commission polo shirt to Brass Bands England's headquarters. I almost went the wrong way in the car. So I've been working for 6 years for the Commonwealth War Graves Commission as the Public Engagement Coordinator for Yorkshire and the North East of England. That's a part-time role, and since last year I've been working full-time across 2 roles because I also work part-time for Brass Bands England as the safeguarding officer here. It's been really interesting for me to see over the course of this last year the number of connections there are between the Commission and Brass Bands England.
Yeah, you wouldn't at first sight think that they were really linked, but actually the reason why you're here is because we think that they very much are. Certainly the outreach and engagement work that you do, the links between military life, remembrance and banding is actually pretty close. So tell us a little bit more about your role at the Commission. What does your day-to-day look like?
So my role at the Commission, I spend a lot of time going out to talk to groups about the work of the Commission. The Commonwealth War Graves Commission is the body that's responsible for commemorating 1.7 million casualties who lost their lives from right across the British Empire during the First World War and the Second World War. My role is to make sure as many people across Yorkshire and the North East of England know about us. So it might be that either myself or some of my volunteers are going out to talk to groups about our work, or going into schools, writing tours for different sites. We've got over 2,000 sites in the north of England which have war graves in them. And we commemorate over 40,000 casualties just in the north, northwest and northeast of England together. I do lots of work with the media. I've got a Facebook group that I look after as well. And basically anything that's anything to do with war graves in Yorkshire and the northeast of England, then I try and make sure I get involved in it.
Yeah, really interesting, broad role that you get to get out and meet people. So I know that you've had a trip to the Brass Band archive. Our wonderful archivist Danny took you along to Heritage Quay to have a rummage around. What were the items that caught your interest while you were there?
So I was really, really interested to see some wonderful uniforms. Of course, they're so military in their appearance, all the braiding, the buttons, and I thought they were absolutely fabulous.
It's a fascinating place, and I think it's so interesting to see, like, those uniforms, although they might not be military uniforms, they feel very military in the way that bands present themselves in their formal attire, I guess. Definitely takes inspiration from that. And I think that really shows in the way that a lot of the public will see bands when they think about Remembrance and performing the last post and being available for Remembrance marches. It's a really significant part of what brass bands do, and a big part of what a lot of our members certainly feel is their contribution and duty to their community. Is that something that you intersect with a lot in your role at the War Graves?
Yeah, I mean, that's right. Brass bands add like the pomp and circumstance to civic events, and particularly remembrance services. They can create a really sombre and poignant atmosphere. So many bands do have a remembrance service as a fixed point in their calendar, and the expectation is that members of the band will show up and play. I was actually at a service for Anzac Day. This is the Remembrance Day for Australian and New Zealand forces, and one of BBE's member bands played before the service. It was outside in a cemetery. Set the tone exactly for what was to follow. They accompanied the hymns, they played the national anthems of New Zealand, Australia, and our own national anthem. We also had a super rendition of Waltzing Matilda as well, which lightened the atmosphere. And that Anzac Day service is actually a new remembrance service to that site. It's only been going for 3 years. And at the end of it, I overheard the MD telling the band that going forwards, attendance at the Anzac Day service was going to be a non-negotiable, just as it is on Remembrance Sunday, were the words he used. So bands themselves understand the importance of being at these services.
So obviously there's those larger memorials in Belgium where we know that there are bandsmen listed, but are there any specific memorials to bandsmen lost?
So aside from listing all our 1.7 million casualties on our online database, the Commonwealth War Graves Commission has one commemoration point for each casualty, and that will be the grave, or in the case of the missing or cremated, their name will be on a memorial. Because most British casualties of the world wars will have died overseas, and there was a policy of non-repatriation, for families in Britain there was a need to create focal points for remembrance at a local level. And that's why we find so many war memorials in this country, and many organisations from workplaces such as post offices to sporting clubs to churches will have rolls of honour of their war dead. And there could be people listening now who are shouting out, we've got a roll of honour in our band room to all our war dead. And if they are, then look those names up on our Commonwealth War Graves Commission's online database and find out where in the world they are commemorated. And perhaps even do a bit of research and add the story to our Forevermore portal.
And if there are any bands who do have items that list bandsmen in their local village, in their band rooms, we would love to see that. So please do take a picture and send it to us, and we'll share it on our Instagram page. So how can people listening find out a little bit more about the work of the Commonwealth War Graves Commission?
As you would expect, we've got a website, cwgc.org, so people can go there to find out more, to run a search for casualties. We've got the online database is accessible there. We've got a presence on all the usual social media channels, so look us up. There's a free app that you can download. It's called CWGC, and it shows the sites nearest to you where we've got war graves. We've got over 13,000 in the United Kingdom, and over 2,000 of those are in the north of England, for example. Yeah. So if you were at Heritage Key and you'd been to visit our archive and you wanted to follow that up by a visit to a commission site, then download the app and it will show you which sites are nearest to you. If you're interested in finding out where we've got free tours happening across the United Kingdom, then if you Google CWGC tours, that will come up. And likewise, if you're in a group which has speakers come to talk to you, or you're a school teacher and you'd like somebody to come and talk to you for free, then Google CWGC talks, fill the form in and put in a request for a talk for your group.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Elizabeth. It's been great to speak to you, and thank you for all of the insight and research that you brought to talk more about brass bands and remembrance.
So that was the very well-known march Colonel Bogey by Kenneth J. Alford. And I'm sure it is very, very familiar to everyone listening, not just as a march that you may have played on one of your remembrance parades, but of course it was featured heavily in the film The Bridge Over the River Kwai, which was made long before you were born, Sarah.
But I have played that piece, even in wind bands as a saxophone player. That was definitely a familiar piece to us, and I'm sure lots of other people. It's just one of those that's in the public consciousness that you just hear at events around and about. Kenneth Alford definitely has significance in our archive. Not only that piece, the music and vinyl are in the archive, but also Kenneth Alford's biography. But Kenneth Alford wasn't actually his real name. Did you know that?
I did actually know that. His name was Major Frederick Joseph Ricketts, which, of course, there's reasons that he would not have been able to write it using that name.
Yep. So as a military man and had his career in the military, a lot of people were limited with income that they could make outside of the military. So it is quite common in brass banding, but also wind band and military band, to publish under pseudonyms because they weren't able to get income from their work whilst they were still within the army. So Kenneth Alford, who is a relatively well-known name, that is a pseudonym, as are many other composers who have works within the archive. So Colonel Bogey, one of the most well-known, but On the Quarterdeck, also a really well-known work from Kenneth Alford that we have within our archive. You've worked with military composers and conductors. You've had military conductors certainly take you for a period of your work. One of your all-stars, I'd say, was a military conductor.
It was. I mean, he's probably one of the biggest influences on my life, and not just me, but many, many people who were fortunate to spend time in the bands that he conducted. Of course, Major Peter Parks, whose picture is on the wall up the stairs in this building as a former president of what was the British Federation of Brass Bands before it became Brass Bands England. But no, I was very fortunate to play under the Major for about 17 years at Whitburn from the age of about 18. So, extremely influential on a young version of me. And I think you'll probably go a long way to find many conductors that'll be more admired than he was, not just for his contribution to bands that were winning contests. He won loads of band contests. He absolutely loved winning band contests, and he was great at it. He hated losing as well, by the way. You didn't want to be standing too close to him when that happened, but he knew when he was going to lose most of the time, so he wouldn't even bother getting in to hear that. But no, an incredible musician, a great man, and one that is very sadly missed when we lost him about 13, 14 years ago. I think he was that person that he arrived at Black Dyke in the mid-70s. He'd been the director of music for the Grenadier Guards at the time, and he was one of these people that gave a shot in the arm to every band by lifting the standard of what was recognised as the top band. They were a band that had done really quite well under Geoffrey Brand, Roy Newsom in the years before that, but then when he arrived, suddenly they were virtually unbeatable for a few years. They did lose occasionally, they didn't win every contest they went to, but his first 8 performances in the Royal Albert Hall, for instance, at the National, and the individual elements of the European were all winning performances. Show me somebody else who can say that. There is nobody, basically. Incredible musician.
Yeah, I find it really fascinating how lots of the military conductors were still engaged in contesting banding, and that was still very much a part of their life. There's links, but those two facets of their life are also kind of at odds as well.
Yeah, I mean, there's been quite a number of them that influenced brass bands hugely over the years. I mean, way back to the early days at Bellevue for the British Open. I mean, if you look at the list of composers, and Lieutenant Colonel Charles Godfrey, I think he wrote the test piece for about 50 years in a row at Bellevue. He was obviously very close to the organisers. Some fantastic names that have dominated contesting through certainly the post-war years. You had Major George Wilcox, really landed on the scene very quickly, and sadly he died very young as well, but made a great impression with bands like Fairies and Black Dyke. Peter Parks that we spoke about, Major Arthur Kenny at Corey, incredible musician who really got everybody's admiration as well. And of course Frank Renton, a huge figure in our world as well, but a massive figure in Army music as the director of music at the Army School of Music at Neller Hall for many years.
And I think it's still really, really common that people from within army music will be conducting, composing or adjudicating. And there are certainly some bands, depending on where they're located in the country, where there happens to be an army or an RAF base nearby, where they just have a lot of army musicians. And then obviously places like Catterick or Tidworth, where they have bands in residence.
We've only had really brass bands in the army for a relatively few years. It was something that just happened in the last 15 years or so when they were fully brass. But I think a lot of that was related to the difficulty they had in getting clarinet players in the numbers that they need them. The recruitment for army musicians is quite a challenge, I believe. And certain instruments I think they have difficulty getting. But the brass bands are a much more recent thing. But it's wonderful that if you think about a young player starting off in their first brass band when they're probably still at primary school, there really is a career there as a professional musician. And you don't actually have to be Philip Cobb or James Fountain or Ross Knight or Peter Moore, players at that absolutely stellar level. You don't have to be that person. You still need to be good. You cannot run an army music service on players that are not good. They have to be good players. But it's very achievable for quite a large number of good brass players. And it's a career that if there had been an army brass band when I was that age, I might have found myself in it.
Yeah. And was there an army band playing at the garden party?
There was indeed. We had a band of the Royal Marines, which was excellent, I have to say. And in fact, they started with Colonel Bogey by Kenneth Alford.
There you go. There you go. A nice route round there.
Hello, my name's Frank Renton. I'm a conductor, one-time trumpet player, teacher, arranger, broadcaster, you name it. Somewhere down the line, I've probably done it.
So, Frank, thanks for joining us. Would you like to start speaking about your earliest musical life and what led you to go into military music?
Early musical life, really, we're talking about brass playing here, started on my 10th birthday when my Uncle Harold came to the house to give me my first cornet lesson as a 10-year-old. 3.5 years later, I was playing second cornet with the Black Dyke Band. I played with them for 4 years, became co-principal trumpet of the National Youth Orchestra of Great Britain, and was destined to be a wonderful young trumpet player. Went to college to study under Cecil Kidd at the Royal Manchester College of Music. And it all blew up in my face. I realised that I was never going to be as good as everybody thought I might be, or even I thought that I might be. So in 1959, I was looking for a job and joined the army. I'd had an invitation to join the band of the Royal Horse Guards from Major Tommy Thurtle, who'd heard me play. So I took it up, joined the army. What, of course, I didn't realise at the time was the word horse in the title Royal Horse Guards, and that I'd have to spend 9 months learning how to ride a horse. I joined the army initially to bring me to London for 3 or 4 years to make myself known, to get involved in the scene in London. And then they offered me the job of going to the Guards School of Music to be the brass instructor at Purbright, which I took with a promotion. Then they suggested that I should become a student bandmaster and conduct bands, and that meant a big promotion and a couple of years of study. And the rest is history.
Would I be right in saying you got one of your first posts was with the Gordon Highlanders up in Fort George?
That was my first job as a bandmaster. I'd been in the army 10 years. I'd graduated from the Royal Military School of Music, Kneller Hall, and I was posted out to the North German Plain in Minden to take over the band of the Gordon Highlanders. Fabulous job. I had 7 glorious years touring the world with a group of musicians who were, fair to say, not the greatest group of musicians in the world, but were a terrific team, were as good on the concert stage as they were on parade, and I enjoyed every minute of it. And I guess it gave me the opportunity to learn my job out of the eyes of everybody in London. I had a brilliant band sergeant major in a guy called Spud Thompson, who really taught me my job. And he was just wonderfully patient, quite a character, but knew the job backwards. So whilst I was a very able conductor and a good musician, the business of running a band of 39 people and being responsible for all their wives and children was something new to me, which I had to learn. Luckily, I'm a quick learner, and luckily I had good teachers, and the 7 years was very successful.
You still managed to retain links with brass bands at that time as well. You were doing a bit of conducting both north and south of the border, weren't you?
Oh yeah, while I was a musician in the Royal Horse Guards, when I went to Purbright to be the teacher there, that was next to Guildford, and the Guildford Silver Band, as they were then, asked me to be their conductor. I took them from the 4th section to the championship section in consecutive years. Not a thing often done. Won the 4th section national championship with them, had a great time. And then when I came back to Fort George, when eventually the Gordon Highlanders came back to Scotland, I was asked to take over the Broxburn Public Band, which again was the championship section band. Great fun. I think even Kenny Crookston's brother was playing in the band at the time.
He was. Yeah, I just missed you by a couple of years actually. Yeah. We played for the same band, but it was a band certainly full of characters, as I do remember. Great characters,
and again a tremendous learning curve and wonderful people to make music with.
So Frank, in the Brass Band archive, we do have an LP recording of Colonel Bogey by Kenneth J. Alford. We all know that wasn't his real name at all.
Frederick Ricketts.
And on the other side is Stars and Stripes by the great American March King, Sousa. Performed by the Black Dyke Mills Band, conducted by Arthur Pierce.
What a name that is.
I think he had just left Black Dyke a few years before you arrived there, Frank.
But yeah, I arrived in 1953.
Memories. You must have some great memories performing these, either as a conductor or as a player.
Somebody once said They call John Philip Sousa the March King and Kenneth Alford the British March King. But as somebody once said, Sousa wrote hundreds of marches, some of which are great. Kenneth Alford wrote 35 marches, all of which are great, and that's the difference between the two of them.
Still, I think it's fair to say that Sousa had quite an influence on marching band culture the world over.
Sousa was a remarkable musician. His dad was a Portuguese immigrant into America who played in the United States Marine Band. Sousa, as a child, was put to all the influences. Everywhere in the Marine Band were teachers prepared to teach the young Supe things, and so he learnt within this thing. Then went out to learn other things as well, and came back to run the United States Marine Band. A musician of great genius. There's no doubt about that. And yes, not everything he wrote is great, and not everything he wrote other than his marches is great. But I think as a conductor and as a businessman, as a leader, he was an absolute genius. Changed the face of banding, certainly in America and possibly in the world.
Yeah. Back to the army career. So you must have played in quite a huge number of significant events over the time. I mean, I'm gathering that there must have been a lot of royal occasions and a lot of remembrance services and the like. Any highlights in amongst that?
Oh, too many to even number. I mean, as a player, first of all, both with the Royal Horse Guards and when I was a member of the fanfare team at the Royal British School of Music, Kneller Hall, we were constantly into London to play at Westminster Abbey or St Paul's at major commemoration services. When you're working with a regiment, every regiment has days that are important to them. I was very privileged as the Gordon Highlanders in 75 when Her Majesty the Queen visited Japan for the first time. I was the bandmaster down in Singapore, so I got the job of doing all the music for the state visit to Japan, which was unusual for a bandmaster rather than a director of music. A very steep learning curve, having to work with the palace and the queries to make sure that everything was exactly as Her Majesty wanted it. But it was a wonderful experience. And all the players in the band, they were Scotsmen, and you know what Scotsmen were like. And I'm talking about the mid-70s and the stirring of independence and all that sort of business. But we played in Japan, and at the end of the state ball in the embassy, Her Majesty came over to talk to the band, and every member of that band to this day will remember the fact that they spoke to Her Majesty the Queen. At the time, they were just all gobsmacked. The whole business was an incredible event, but the most personal part of it was the actual personal interest that Her Majesty and the Duke of Edinburgh took in the musicians that were there working for them. And we were flown up from Singapore into Japan to do all this, and it was a tremendous occasion and a great privilege.
Any remembrance services? Did you ever do the thing at Albert Hall? Or?
No, that was the bailiwick of the Brigade of Guards, and I was never a director of music in the brigade. But of course, as principal director of music, you keep an eye on everything that you see. And I thought quite often it was a tremendous occasion, a wonderful moment of remembrance. And I think the service of remembrance at the Cenotaph on the Sunday morning is remarkable. And I still watch it, and to see all those people marching past, prepared to remember those that didn't come back, I think is remarkable. I watched some of the D-Day remembrance, and I think they were remarkable events. What's really good is people like Alan Thomas and Ben Godfrey and all the great musicians who play in the service bands who are involved. They all talk about what a privilege it is to be involved in these events. Now, I feel that, and I think it's marvellous that these young professional people who are at the top of the business and are really high-focused musicians still feel what a great privilege it is to be involved in events like the Festival of Remembrance, D-Day Remembrance, the Queen's funeral and the coronation. They were all just remarkable in the things that they said about the privileges of being involved. And I found that very moving. Services are big on remembrance for one major reason. It's important for those that are serving now to remember that those that have gone before, many of them have actually given their lives to allow us to live the life that we want. thousands of people felt that it was important that they should defend their country and the rights of everybody who lives in this country to live the way they wanted to. Now, I don't know that in the general population that feeling is important as it is in the services. But the only place it's going to emanate into the general population is if it does from the services. The last post was originally the bugle call that signified the end of the fighting day, when everything was shut down and everything came to a close and everybody could go to bed and forget about it till the valley. And then next morning we all started again. The last post came to signify also the end of a soldier's life. So all these things have got tremendous importance and great significance for service people. And it is very moving because what it signifies, it signifies people who've been prepared to give up everything they had in defence of their country and in defence of their loved ones. Because at the end of the day, yes, you're fighting for king and country, but you're also fighting for what you've got at home as well. In a way, I think we have to rediscover that, but I think it's important that it stays so central to the very ethos of life in the services.
Welcome back. That was the always knowledgeable and engaging Frank Renton, and then following that, On the Quarterdeck by Kenneth Alford, played by the Grimthorpe Colliery Band. It's been a fascinating journey through remembrance and military music and the obvious links between the military and brass banding and royalty and royal patronage as well. Royal connections have always been there, particularly Queen Elizabeth II, who was the patron of the National Brass Band Championships.
Right through her entire reign, I believe. She actually attended the National one year. I think it was in the time it was away from the Albert Hall at Earl's Court. I think they were doing some renovation at the Royal Albert Hall. So it was early 50s, 51, 52. My research has just temporarily let me down. But it was certainly around about that time. There was pictures in the bandsmen who attended the event. But not something that ever happened in my lifetime, that's for sure. There's always been that link. And of course, there's never been a brass band contest held in this country. Certainly if the test piece variety, that you don't begin with the first band playing God Save the King now. It was the only good thing about getting a number one draw. You got a warm up on what used to be God Save the Queen.
Amazing. I think it is worth mentioning, just to finish up, that Queen Elizabeth II's the only woman that we've spoken about during the course of the episode. And I think that's really just a sign of the times of what military banding looked like in that war era. But it's not reflective really of what being a military musician looks like now. Lots and lots of female brass players, certainly within military music, which is amazing to see. And certainly one of the really great army recruiters who worked with us a fair bit in the last few years, Amy, was an amazing, very dynamic woman who was within army music. So it's definitely moving and changing, but it's fair to say that hasn't always been the case within military music, but within brass banding either. But we're going to cover that a little bit more because later on this series, we've got a whole episode dedicated to women in banding and diversity within the banding sector more generally. So we're going to dive into that later on this series. So if you want to see any of the items that we've talked about as part of this podcast series, then all you need to do is head to Heritage Quay at the University of Huddersfield, where the wonderful Brass Bands Archive is held and supported by the team there. Take a look on the Heritage Quay website. You can find out more information about how you can request an appointment to see any of these items in person and speak to our wonderful and knowledgeable archivists who will help you through. If you're interested in research, lots of the British Bandsmen journals are available there. As we said before, a really, really popular piece. But we also have lots of trophies, uniforms and books, in particular The Rise and Development of Military Music and the biography of Kenneth J. Alford, that are really relevant to today's episode. Thank you so much for listening. This has been the Brass Band Podcast Archive Edition. Tune in next time where we're going to be talking about a brass band dynasty, diving into the amazing family that is the Mortimers. The Brass Band Podcast Archive Edition is brought to you by Brass Bands England. Thank you to Arts Council England, National Lottery Heritage Fund and the Scottish Power Foundation for their support. Thanks also to World of Brass for the beautiful music they provided. To listen to all of the music from this episode and so much more, head to whatplay.com.
To find out more about this series and the wider work of Brass Bands England, head over to our website at bbe.org.uk and follow us on social media. If you think you have a unique item that would be suitable for the archive, get in touch with us by emailing archive@bbe.org.uk.
If you enjoyed the podcast, please leave us a 5-star review and make sure you're subscribed to avoid missing out on any of our upcoming episodes. Share your favourite moments on social media and use the hashtag BrassBandPodcast. Your support goes a really long way. Thanks for listening and stay tuned for our next episode.